Mr. Olu Victor. Our host, Mr. Tony Abioye, and their dad, Professor John Abioye. The General Manager, Lagos State Office of Disabilities, Asoria Dr. Babatunde Awolende, former Lagos State Commissioner for Physical and Urban Planning, Mr. Tony Abioye, and his representative. President Autism Parents Association, Mrs. Angela Moore, the founder of the Oasis University, Professor Abioye Aboyeji, and the Managing Director of Action and Microfinance Bank, Mrs. Yemi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me first say how privileged I am to be here at the relaunch of the These Abilities Foundation. Because for me, the reason why I say it's a privilege is because first, it's an opportunity to celebrate the memory of one of the most outstanding innovators of our generation, a young man called Abioye. And of course, I had the great pleasure and privilege of having interacted with him for so very many years. I'm a family friend of the Abioyes. And here was an individual who was so resilient, so committed to the cause, and so innovative that he literally carried everybody, just by the sheer force of his own enthusiasm and his own commitment. And I recall that, I believe it was in 2014, towards the end of 2014, or early 2015, it was actually early 2015, when we were campaigning for the 2015 elections at the time. That again, invited me with several others to an event which was even actually targeted to coincide with my birthday. And we had an incredibly good time with all of the various actors, who work in the area of giving all manner of support for disabilities. I just remember how committed he was and how so very innovative and creative he was. Even the word disabilities is evidence of that creativity, how so easily you can translate, or how so easily you can transform advantage to such great hope and such great advantage. I think the second reason why one should be pleased to be here, and I believe that that's the same for all of us, is that this is an opportunity to reignite that very great idea, the Disabilities Foundation, an outstanding advocacy vehicle for rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities. It is true that mankind has not yet found a way of killing a good idea. And whether we like it or not, whether we choose to do it or not, someone else will, somebody else will. And I think we have a very privileged, and we must feel special that we're in a position to promote this great idea, and that we can call ourselves partners in doing so. And I know that if we all work at this, it will not only be a pleasure, it will also be we'll also be fortunate to see how this foundation achieves its purposes. I just want to say, just by way of a comment, that sometimes when we look at disabilities in our context, and when I say our context, I speak of our country, issues, of course, are complicated by the fact of poverty. And there is no way that you can separate context from the way that disability is treated, and from the way that is understood. And if we understand the context, and we understand the context of a society such as ours, with all of its inherent disadvantages, then it's not so difficult to see why we are where we are today in terms of how we treat the disabled and what opportunities are available for them. And so I think that anyone who is concerned with issues of disability and issues of inclusion must also take along questions around how to deal with issues of poverty in in our society? How do we deal with issues of poverty? Because the context is so important. For example, I did quite a bit of work on prison conditions and all of that over the years. You know. And every time you talk about improving prison conditions, you have to also look at the conditions of society. You know. And there are those who will tell you that, look, if you make the prison so comfortable, more people will want to go in there. That's better. So again, these are issues of context that have to be taken into account in development. But I want to say that it lies within our own, within our reach, and it is also within our scope as individuals and as persons active in society to talk about issues of poverty and try and deal with issues of poverty. I functioned actively for many years, not only just as a teacher, as a professor of law, but also as a lawyer. And you know, if I may say so, an activist in the rights area. I also did a bit of work with the anti-corruption movement as it started in 1991. And it became evident to me that one of the chief reasons why our country is so poor is because of corruption. But the reason why corruption is pervasive is because we have accepted it one way or the other as a way of life for us. We've accepted it, we even celebrate it, and we allow it. And I think that that's one of the chief problems of those who are trying to contest corruption. And we cannot emerge, we cannot take our place in society, in the Committee of Nations, without dealing with corruption. Because the primary reason for poverty in our society has what it takes to be able to provide for most of us, It has the capacity to do so. But if that capacity is privatized, if some people take that away and use it only for themselves, their families, and their friends, then it's impossible. And we have to address it. We have to take the challenge. Sometimes when you look at what goes on with, and many times when I look at the social media and I look at the debates on corruption, it's very obvious that those who have the resources are able to dominate the argument or confuse the argument and make it seem as if it is something other than what it is. For example, a person who is caught with £1 billion in his account, a civil servant who earns maybe 500,000 a month or whatever, and who is caught with £1 billion, ordinarily in any other society ought not to be able to walk the streets easily. But here, you know, he has a willing band of supporters. Some who will say that they belong to him. He's a Southwest person. He's from Undo or he's from Ikeme, my town. For that reason, he should not be caught and thrown in jail. And then you will find that there are arguments, there are actually arguments around that, especially in social media. Why? Because those who have the resources can dominate the argument. And I think it's important that we do not talk about issues that concern us without taking into context our society and making ourselves willing fighters against what it is that deters us from achieving our objectives. And I think that this is one of those things that seriously deters us from achieving our objectives. Because as I speak about poverty, it's also an issue with planning. One of the things I found, you know, in government was that the way that we plan, the way we budget, the way we plan, is not necessarily inclusive, because there are concepts around budgeting. Those concepts are concepts of, they are, you know, economic concepts that are developed by those who have an understanding of economics, but don't necessarily have an understanding of poverty and how to deal with poverty. So, for example, there are those who will say that the way to provide jobs is to ensure that industry thrives, and once industry thrives, once there is, you know, once things are working, people will get jobs. That's a trickle-down, the whole trickle-down concept. But in poor societies, you cannot wait, because there are too many people who are poor. And you can't have industry growing at the rate at which population is growing, for example. So there must be adequate provision in some other ways. So there must be social investments, safety nets, and those kinds of things. For the first time, and I believe in the history of the country, we try to provide, in thinking through the budget of 2016 and 2017, what is called a social investment program. which essentially is the beginnings of a social safety net. And there is a law respecting that, but we won't have time to talk about that. But the whole point of the 500 billion for social investment was to provide some kind of safety net, some kind of way of ensuring that we are able to work on inequality and work on issues of poverty. And so this is meant to provide 500,000 jobs for graduates who have not previously been employed for a 2-year period while they are looking for opportunities in training period and all that. It's also to provide conditional cash transfers for the poorest of the poor, about 1 million. Also to provide some opportunities for microcredit for market women, traders, artisans, etc. It also provides social housing. But the most important part of this is, especially for our purposes, is that it provides especially for persons with disabilities. It provides, especially for them. And so the whole point is that the vulnerable, especially those with disabilities, are taken care of in this arrangement. But that's hardly enough because we have a huge problem. But it's really the beginning of thinking through budgeting, not just at the federal level, but at state level, that a substantial provision must be made for trying to deal with issues of inequality, especially the disadvantaged. And I must say that I'm extremely proud of what Lagos State has done and what it continues to achieve with the legislation and, of course, the Lagos State Persons with Disability Fund. I think this is very, very important. And I like the fact that that they are proactive and that they are thinking, about this on a regular basis. We have an office for it, and they're dealing with the issues. The governor himself is actively involved in it. The National Disabilities Bill is still, I believe, at the second reading now in the Senate. We hope that it will go through Senate, but I think that the most important thing is for activists to be focused on the questions and to be there at the National Assembly, to work the National Assembly, to use the social media. I was at the civil society, what they call the situation room in Abuja, I believe on Thursday, and this was one of the issues that arose, how to ensure that, and in particular the disabilities bill, how do we ensure that the National Assembly is kept on its toes on these sorts of issues and that they eventually deliver on passing the bill. And I think that that is really the function of civil society activists and many of us who are in this room to ensure that the effort is made. It is a private member's bill, but at the same time, it requires a great deal of activism, it requires a great deal of informing and also challenging our National Assembly members. I believe very strongly that every challenge is ultimately an opportunity, and that the significance that one gains in life, whatever that significance may be, is really a function of what the challenge is and how we're able to surmount that challenge. That is so, whether it's a disability, a physical disability, or any other type of disability. So really, I mean, at the end of the day, the story of our lives, and what we attain and what we achieve will always be measured by what challenges we're able to surmount. And I believe that the reason why we celebrate a man like Abioye today is because he really worked hard at surmounting not just the physical challenge, but confronting that challenge in a way that will benefit society. I think that's so important. When I look around this room, I ask myself how many people, aside from the professors who are here, are authors. Professor Abioye is here, of course I'm also a professor, so we are forced to be writers. I don't know how many other people, have written a book. But those who mind to write books, I think, are very, very special and very important. And here we are with us, Toria Adejola. I see that she didn't raise her hand, but she is an author. And she's a person who lives with a disability, but an outstanding author, for that matter. One of the I have the pleasure of reading her book. I believe the book is called Still Standing, yes. I have the pleasure of wrote that book many years ago. And, and also the, living with a story about her life, and how, from childhood, she had to deal with issues of a chronic case of sickle cell, and how through life she's had to deal with this, and what she's become, her advocacy, the work that she's done, and all of that. When you look at it, it's probably one of the most insightful books on any subject that you'll ever read. And I think it's a great inspiration for millions of people. When you ask yourself, what is it that makes it possible to write such a deeply touching book, a book that educates, a book that really opens your mind in that way? It comes from the place of having, of having suffered in some senses, of having felt a challenge, and of having to deal with that challenge, and in some senses overcome it. It's impossible to do these kinds of things unless you have been there. Nobody can write a book on living with sickle cell if you haven't had sickle cell. And I think that, the way that people like yourself, have used a challenge to bless the world and to teach the world and to teach all of us is really an incredible testimony of what we as human beings can do to better our society, regardless of what our circumstances may be. So I'm really, I'm really glad to be here and to be a part of this. And I am also meant to launch this book. I'm sure that you'll notice that if you have a copy of the report on disabilities, touchism, once you have a copy of it, I wrote a keynote. It's supposed to be the keynote address. But of course, you'll notice that I've deviated completely from it in this particular speech. But this is a very important report.